Okay, welcome. This is for Wooster School faculty and staff. This is hopefully going to provide you some insight into what impact testing is, why we do it, and what it measures in our kids and what the test results actually mean. We're going to hopefully do this through some case studies after I explain an overview of the test itself. ImPACT really stands for Immediate Post-Concussive Assessment Cognitive Testing. It's one of the few tests that we can do with concussed students or students that we suspect of being concussed. They actually look at the brain function. You often hear kids getting CAT scans or MRIs for their injuries. But that just takes a picture. It doesn't tell you how the brain is functioning. And with our population, what we worry about, what we care about is how the brain is actually function. So that's why this impact test is a really great tool, and that's what it is. It's a tool. It's not meant to be a standalone diagnostic tool. It's supposed to go hand in hand with a clinical and physical exam. So what exactly is an impact test? Well, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see modules. These are the actual tests that the kids take. There's a word memory discrimination, design memory, X's and O's, symbol matching, color match, and 3 letters. The nice part about this test is it takes into account things like kids that are colorblind. It takes into account things, for instance, kids that have ADD, ADHD. It takes those things into account, so they're not penalized necessarily for performance on the test itself. Now, if you look over the left-hand column, there's the metrics. These are the overview of the test scores that we look at when we're trying to determine if a kid is cognitively impaired. So there's memory composite verbal, memory composite visual, visual motor speed, reaction time composite, impulse control composite, and total symptom score. These metrics are made up of the modules themselves. So we take some of the modules in order to get the memory composite verbal score, for instance. There's a lot of kind of cross-pollination between the modules to get the different metrics. I'm not going to go into detail about those because I think that would be kind of overwhelming and unnecessary for you to have to sit through. So let's look at some impact test scores so you can actually see what I look at when a kid takes the test. So here is, and again, these are the big picture of things. There are several pages after the page that you're looking at now that will tell you more about the specific test score, but these are the overall big metrics that we look at. And what I want you to pay attention to here is that we did a baseline on 3/4/2010. Then we had an injury occur on 3/5/2010, so literally the day after we did the impact test baseline. We were able to get a post-injury test 3 days later on 3/8/2010, and as you can see, the numbers that are in red there, that shows that they become red because they're significantly below the baseline, and the significance is taken through what impact has been, clinically tested and validated to be valid, to have a threshold of kind of the left and to the right of the baseline of where somebody could be when they get retested. And when they become red, it means that they've become significantly lower than their baseline score. So as you can see, they originally had a 79. In the post-injury one, they're at 42. Or they were at 38.83, now they're at 26.75. You look over, and 2 days later, this child in particular, the parent was concerned that this was related to migraines and not a concussive injury. So we retested the student 2 days later, and still they were cognitively impaired in all the same categories. And you can see down at the bottom, symptom score. He had 1 in a baseline, and then he was up to 44, and then 46. So his head really wasn't feeling right. And now, what I want you to really pay attention to is post-injury 2, the second test, the last column. You can see there's no more red. And if you look at the dates, this was the difference between having 2 weeks of March break, winter break, and how the brain is able to bounce back when given rest, when given cognitive rest, as well as physical rest. Look how the student's able to perform. So In this case, the student did go back for a second opinion after we got the second the first post-injury 2 test taken. The kid was taken to a doctor, and they did come around to believing that this was concussive and it wasn't related to migraines. And then 2 weeks of spring break rest, and the student now is in a position where they have no problems, they're not cognitively impaired, and they're back to baselines. And fortunately, we had no other problems with this student. Okay, let's go through now. Let's look at, this is a case where a student tried to push through, although being symptomatic, they tried to push through the school day. And as you can see, 10:19 when we took our first post-injury test, all the way to 11:1, this was a student that, although they had symptoms, you can look down at the symptom score where it was at 34, 24, then back down to 19, so there was improvement there. There was no real improvement in the memory composite. They were still impaired, and part of the reason they were impaired is that the student did not listen to instructions to rest, and they tried to push through their injury, and their injury was prolonged. So the problem with having a kid in school, even if they are just symptomatic, is that their brain is still being bombarded with a lot of cognitive stimuli that doesn't allow the brain to rest to fully heal itself. So that's something to take note. That's one of the reasons that we want kids out of school and at home resting without any sort of physical or cognitive exercising, because that's the fastest way to get the brain better. Sometimes it takes a long time, but it's the only way we know to get the brain rested for our population is to remove them from school. All right, now we have what I wanted you to pay attention here is that in the case, as symptoms decline, scores improve. So if you look at the baseline, they had a baseline kind of symptom score of 11. Immediately after the injury, we were spiked up to 61. And then when we tested 10 days later, they're down to 16. And as their symptoms went down, you can see their scores went up. In the case of memory composite visual, yeah, it did go down to 28 from a 39, but the memory composite verbal had improved, and in other areas, the tests improved. And then finally, 2 days later, the student shows that there's no cognitive impairment. The symptom score is now no longer red, and this is how we progress a kid through injury, by having them stay at home without any sort of cognitive physical exercise till they're symptom free. Then we start a half day back, then we do a full day back, and then we'll retest after that full day back. And if they're symptom free, we start the 4-day return to play protocol. That's his graduated exercise. And then it is during this process, kids should be coming back to their teachers, kind of getting an outline of what they need to make up, and then forming timelines with you to make that work up. And what I've always told kids is that they should come to you with one sheet of paper with all their assignments, so you, the teacher, can see what all the other teachers are asking of that teacher, so we don't overload that kid. Because just like you can go out on the field and get hit again and have a relapse of symptoms, cognitively, you can overload the brain and you can have a relapse of symptoms. So that's why we want to have kind of a graduated return back to class as well. So that's one of the reasons we recommend sometimes kids sit up in the front, kids wear sunglasses, kids have somebody else taking notes for them, or have notes prepared by the teacher for them upon initial return to class. The reason for that is it's a gradual return back cognitively. And that wraps up the slideshow presentation. Hopefully this helped answer some questions as to what this test is, how it measures cognitive impairment, cognitive functioning. It's not an IQ test, but it is a tool for us to use to look deeper into the brain to see if a kid is cognitively impaired. And the whole purpose behind this is that hopefully a student is allowed to fully heal before being put back into a situation where he could get or she could get hit in the head again. Because if you do not recover your cognitive functioning before being hit again, you risk permanent cognitive loss, and that's something that none of us want for our student population. And that's why it's so important that we take tests like this to be able to peer into the brain to make sure that it's back to its full functioning status before overloading it with academic work or physical work. If you have any questions, please let me know. Always here to help, and thank you for your time, and I hope this was informative and useful for you.